Hi, Dean.
Welcome. Thank you, Christina. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to talk about some European trips. It's back in March, I was scheduled to give a presentation at the library on planning a trip to Europe. Well, this year all those trips got canceled, and but it's good to tonight we'll be reliving a trip so that hopefully you can enjoy it. Even though we're not traveling to Europe this year, but we will be able to return to travel, I think, in the not too distant future. So, hopefully tonight you'll learn a few things about Vienna that you might enjoy. I started doing these presentations in cooperation as a member of the Institute of Continued Learning. It's a group of lifelong learning for adults 55 and older. And we meet right in Schaumburg at Roosevelt University. Right now we're meeting by Zoom, but it's a wonderful program. Some people are there 4 days a week, morning and afternoon, just because they find all that social interaction and all the learning too much to their liking. It's learning without tests and without grades, but it's just fun to learn. So tonight we're going to be talking about a trip to Vienna. And this is, I'll give you a little background on the trip. It took place in July of 2014. And my wife is a singer with the Chicago Master Singers. And every other year in July, they go off to Europe. Everyone pays their own way. It's no sponsorship. But every year they go to, they've gone to Rome and have sung at St. Peter's Basilica. They've gone to Paris and sang at Notre Dame. But in 2014, they went and started in Strasbourg, Austria, and wound their way through Central Europe and ended in Croatia. And this was the final concert night, and all their singers were tired. They've been, spending 10 days singing at least once a day, and sometimes twice a day with all kinds of rehearsals. So they were worn out. So after the tour ended, we had our farewell dinner, and then Mary and I, with a friend, went to a park, the national park in Croatia, Plitvice Lakes National Park. And this is just an amazing place to visit because they have 16 lakes that all cascade into each other. It's a marvel of geography, of geology, of how these lakes are positioned and the mineral and the clay underneath the lakes that keep them, separate and yet interconnected. So it was just a wonderful, relaxing day. And then the following, well, here's just another picture of showing the lakes and the walkways as you take this basically a 1.5 mile walk through the various lakes. So this was a wonderful way to spend a day and start to relax after the 10 days of the concert. Now, I was a groupie at the concert. I wasn't a singer. So my job was often to find a good pub for us all to meet after the concert. But I would attend some of the concerts, but I'd also have to check out where we would go after the concerts. So here, after we spent the day at the national park, we went back to Croatia and we caught a train to Vienna. And this is the train station in Zagreb, a very ornate building back to 1895, back when Zagreb was part of the Austrian-Hungary Empire. And we'll be talking about that shortly. But so here was a train station that allowed people to go back to the capital in Vienna. And it was a wonderful train ride through the mountains, through the Austrian Alps. And here we were there's Mary, my wife Mary, we were enjoying a little breakfast on the train. It left quite early and it was an 8-hour trip with only 5 or 6 stops on the way. It was basically going through the mountains. And but here we were having a wonderful little breakfast. And then we arrived in Vienna. And it's interesting. We picked Vienna purposely. We could have gone to Rome. We could have taken a train to Rome, but Rome or Madrid in July, it's very, very hot. So we've been to Rome a number of times on our trips, but you really want to go to, it's wonderful to visit Rome in the springtime or even in the fall. We've been to Rome in November, but in July, Rome is very, very hot. But if you go north of the Alps to Vienna or to Munich, July, it's just a wonderful time to visit. It was very pleasant weather. So, and we rented an apartment. And we've done this a number of times when we've traveled alone or traveled with another couple. And this was the apartment on the right. And we were on what they call the second floor, and we would call the third floor. And our apartment, it was basically a one room with a kitchen. And it was right close to the center of town. There was a tram stop right on, the tram ran right down our street. There was a bakery immediately across the street. So in the morning, I could go get the fresh chocolate croissants and other pastries, and we could have that with coffee. And then at evening, we often had our main meal at lunch. And then at evening, if we were tired, we could just stay in our apartment and have cheese and wine and bread and have just a simple meal at night. And that's one of the wonders of having your own apartment. If you rent, if you're at a hotel, there are certainly benefits to being at a hotel, but usually in Europe, you might get a fridge. You typically don't get a microwave. It's and you're kind of cramped in just a smaller room in Europe. Most of the rooms aren't as big as the hotel rooms in the US. But having an apartment for about the same price as a hotel, it's a very nice trade-off. And so here was our little apartment. Now, that night we went to a pub, and we follow a lot of Rick Steves, and in our travels. And Rick Steve talked about in Vienna, there are pubs and they have a special name. And I tried to look up what that name was and I couldn't find it. But back in 2014, when we were looking at the Rick Steves books, he gave the name of the type of establishment it is. And we found one just 2 blocks from our hotel, our apartment. And here is some goulash and some sausage, and it's just amazing how much food we got for pub food for $25. And later, when we went back to the same, we wound up just sharing a chicken schnitzel, and they don't mind you sharing food. You know, having one plate, as long as you're ordering a beer along with it, they're perfectly happy, and they were delightful that we were there. It was no imposition that why are you Americans splitting a meal? They were just very happy we were there, and we were there relatively early, so no one else was being denied a table. But wonderful food that we had. So first of all, before I jump through what we did for that week, I wanted to cover a little bit of history of Austria. And in Austria, the Habsburgs are the royal family for 700 years in Austria. And so they were the big family in the dynasty. But if we look at Vienna, it started off as a Roman army camp, and then eventually grew to an empire of 53 million people. So by World War I, which was spelled the end of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, they had 53 million people. And the capital, after World War I, when all that was split up in it was divided up and 6 or 7 new countries were formed, it went from a capital of 53 million to a country of Austria, which is about the size of Indiana, with 9 million residents in Austria. So it went from a huge empire to a much smaller operation. But just a little more of the history. So, it started out the army camp. It became a trading center. It became the capital under King Henry II, but it didn't even have its own bishop, which is a sign of a size of an important town, until 1469. And then in 1556, it became the seat, it became an empire because Hungary and Bohemia were added to the original empire, the original kingdom. In 1683, the Ottoman Turks surrounded and laid siege to Vienna. And at that time, the Ottoman Turks were this incredible, they were the superpower. Every battle they fought, they won just about. And it was only the intervention of the Polish army and the Polish king that saved Vienna. They came from Poland and opened the siege, and the Turks retreated from Vienna. And that is as far as they ever came on the within Central Europe. They decided they were just going to be happy with Serbia and other parts, but they weren't going to expand into different parts of Western Europe. It changed history of Europe by the success of the armies to defeat the Ottoman Turks. By the 18th century, Vienna was a center of architecture, classical music, Mozart, and it was just to name a few, but architecture and classical music were very, very dominant. In the mid 1800s, the medieval walls that surrounded Vienna were knocked down, and they created this what used to be this wide wall. They created what they call the Ring Street, or the Ringstrasse. And so this was at the edge of what was the original medieval town. And in the succeeding 30 and 40 years, many new buildings were built along the Ringstrasse. And they had trams, it was horse-drawn trams initially, now electrified trams. And it's a marvel. You can hop on a tram and just surround, take the tour of the entire city and see all these magnificent buildings. It's a wonderful, basically a $2 tour of Vienna. And this just shows the empire as it existed. And 53 million people, at least 9 different languages, major languages spoken. And all of this was managed out of Austria. And in the 20th century, Austria was annexed by Adolf Hitler into Germany, and largely with the support of the people. They had an election after the fact, after the German troops moved in, and about 98% of the people voted, yes, we want to be part of Germany. So this was part of their heritage during World War II. After the war, the Russian army defeated the German army and took over in Vienna and Austria. They finally left in 1956. But in the late 40s, this was kind of a spy capital of Europe, because the Russians were there, the Russians hoped it would be part of the Iron Bloc, but Stalin had promised to let it go, become free. But all of that was very much in play in the late 40s and early 50s, but eventually Austria became its own free, independent, democratic country. But when we look at Austria and Vienna, the guy here on the left here is very important. He's Franz Joseph. He was the fellow, he was ruled for this enormous amount of time. He became emperor quite young, but he ruled for over 60 years. And he was a very hardworking ruler. They said even a tenant farmer could come and petition in his court, and he would listen to them. he married the Empress of a woman, Elizabeth of Bavaria, and she is very much featured around Vienna today. Her nickname was Sissy. And so you see billboards of her. You see, you can buy a key ring, and she's one of the famous personalities of Vienna, and they still honor her and celebrate her life today. Probably more so than Franz Joseph. His nephew was the fellow that was shot in Sarajevo, and that was part of the triggers for World War I. But back to what we saw. So here is St. Stephen's Cathedral, and this was finished in 1433. Remember, they didn't get a bishop until the 1500s sometimes, but they built this magnificent cathedral. And during the siege of Vienna, and again later, this served as an observation post for the artillery. And another interesting story about this cathedral, Ludwig van Beethoven, he lived nearby. And Vienna at that time was a relatively, until they knocked the walls down, Vienna proper was a relatively small, 10 or 12 square miles until they knocked the walls down and expanded outside the walls. But Ludwig discovered his deafness that had gotten even more severe. He knew he was losing his hearing. But one time he was walking in the central square and he saw all the birds fly away from the bell tower because the bells were ringing, but he could not hear the bells. So he knew they were ringing, but he couldn't hear it. He knew his deafness had gone to even a further level of deafness. So here's this cathedral, very Baroque, it's a huge cathedral, very ornamental, lots of artwork. Here's a picture from the bell towers and from the organ loft. And look at the statues even up high. Here's Mary at the organ. We paid, you can take a private tour. You can pay and they let you walk up there. So, they give you a little booklet. But Mary's a musician and taught music for many years in Palatine at the public schools. But so here, she did not play the organ, but she sat by it. And it's a very, very beautiful instrument. Mozart played here among many other places. Now, and here we've had dachshunds much of our life here, as we've been married 18 years. So we always stop and visit if we see somebody with a dachshund. And here's Mary talking to an owner of a dachshund. And frankly, there are not many dachshunds in Germany and Austria. It's the national dog of Germany, but they seem to have given up on the dachshund. We saw many more golden retrievers and bigger dogs than you see the small dogs. Off on the left is a ceramic dachshund. It's only $500 to buy, but we looked at it. We did not buy one. Here, Vienna has a wonderful wonderful transportation system. They have trams that take you around. The tram on the right is one of the older trams, and after World War II, with the bombing from the Allied air forces, their transportation system was just in total mess. But they bought some of the trams from New York City with the Marshall Plan. And so they shipped them over by boat and brought them to Vienna and used them for many years. This is an older tram on the right. The tram on the left is one of the newer versions. And the tram on the left, you could roll a wheelchair directly in. You don't have to climb on the tram on the right. There is a little step that you have to take, and they run them alternatively so that at least when we were there. So if you had accessibility issues, you could wait for the next tram, which might be 5 or 10 minutes, and then you could get on one without even climbing a single step. In the middle of the page here, we have a card that you can purchase ride for 8 days, unlimited rides in the downtown area, in the central Vienna, for $24, for 24 euros. So that's about $30. You could have 8 days, or you could have 2 people with 4 days. You could just or you could have 8 people for 1 day. So you could use it in any format that you want. And when on the first day that we were using the tram, we punched this in, and it punched the day, once for me and once for Mary. And we thought we were all set. And everything here is on the honor system. At least you can get on. There's nobody checking your ticket. However, there are ticket checkers that come around, and they're dressed in casual clothes, or they don't have a transit uniform. But if they ask you to see your ticket and you do not have one, it's a 100 or 200 euro fine for riding without a ticket. Well, we went 4 or 5 days and nobody stopped us, or nobody approached us. But eventually, a ticket checker asked us for our ticket, and we showed him. We brought out and it turned out we had punched just the first day, and we thought that meant that we were going to use it for the next succeeding days. And he said, no, you have to punch it for each day that you're going to use it. Now, you can skip a day, but if you're gonna use it on Tuesday and then again on Thursday, you have to punch it in for the date to be for both Tuesday, and then punch it again for Thursday. We didn't know that, so he showed us how to do it, and he did not give us a $200 fine. He was very, very nice, even though we were violating the law, violating the rules. But and that's typical in Europe. We've had this many times when, throughout no maliciousness on our part, we're violating one transit rule or another, and universally they say, here's how you do it for the future, and they've always been very nice about it. And here's some of the subways. Subways in Vienna are very prevalent, and they're very modern. Most of these were destroyed during World War II, so they rebuilt everything, and certainly they rebuilt the stations because they all have elevators or escalators. And that's true in some cities like Munich, but in other cities like London and Paris, some of those subway stations are 100 years old or 120 years old, and they're the only way to get down to the subway is taking steps. But the good news is you can go online and check to see what are the accessibility issues and for different stations, and that can help you decide perhaps what hotel you go to, or where you will go. So Europe can be very accessible, but you have to do your research. So one of the I'm going to be showing some of the things that we did during our trip, and one of the beauties of Vienna is you could look at you could Google things like the top 20 sites, and sometimes when you do this in some cities, you can say, wow, those top 4 or 5 are just ones that I want to see, but the rest are, unless you were interested in water polo or fishing, you'd say, well, that's really not so interesting to me. Vienna has top 20 sites for everybody. You could be interested in classical music and find top 20 sites. You could be interested in sports and find other 20 sites. There's so much there. We just had to pick some that we wanted to see. But it's much like London. It's just an amazing city that has something for everybody, and not only something, but a whole lot of things for everybody. It's just an amazing city to visit. And we were coming off this 10-day intensive, singing tour, particularly Mary. I was more of a groupie tag along, but so we did not want to be, hiking all through the town for 8 hours a day. We wanted to be more relaxed for a change. But here is the Opera House of Vienna, and it's just a wonderful building. Oh, I'm hit the wrong button here. Here's the Opera House. I hit my keypad. So the Opera House goes back to the 1800s. It's an amazing building. It was partially damaged in World War II, but not significantly. On the right, it shows the screen and some of the pictures. Here is, it's very, very ornate, much more than our Lyric Opera, even though Lyric is a wonderful building. Acoustically, we're wonderful. They are wonderful architecturally throughout the entire building. You look around and say, this is an amazing architecture. On the left is, shows the main room of the Opera House, and all the private seating areas, box seats are up on the left and right. The picture on the right was interesting. We had a tour. So we had a tour guide leading us through the Opera House. And every winter, they have the annual debutante ball at the Opera House. And they take out all the seats that you see on the left, and they put in a raised floor. And as you can see here, there has to be, it has to be 150 debutantes and their escorts. And the families pay big money to rent one of the boxes. So, so this helps them with their opera budget, because they raise $1 million, I don't know if it's several $1 million, but they raise a significant amount of money by hosting this annual debutante ball to offset the cost of running operas, which is quite expensive. Here is one of the major areas. This is a statue of Mozart, surrounded in this beautiful rose garden area. The building on the left is one of the buildings from the emperor, and this could I'm not sure if this is the main building for administration, but there are these royal buildings all throughout this part of Vienna. And one is now the National Library, another is the Museum of History. So they've converted these buildings into public usage. Here's the one of the gardens, and Mary's holding our Rick Steves book. We tend to follow a lot of Rick Steves' advice, and there are many wonderful travel books out there, but every travel book tells you what are the key sites that you want to see. What we like about Rick Steves is he tells you how to get there. He might say, get on bus 29 and take it to subway 14 and get off at this stop. It's that level of detail that's very helpful if you're planning your own trip and managing your own trip. If you could sign up for a tour guide that will manage your whole visit to Vienna. And we've done that for some of the trips, but this one, we managed all those details ourselves, and Rick Steves gives us the details on how to do that with a great deal of humor along the way. We enjoy his WTTW presentations as well. Here's the Rose Garden. And so this was the Royal Rose Garden, more statues in the background. I mean, this is enormous Rose Garden surrounded by these public buildings. Here, we tend to wander around churches and cathedrals, and music is one of our points. And here there's a church just a block from St. Stephen's Cathedral, and we saw a wedding taking place, and it was actually, this is the Opus Dei organization's church, and they're a conservative Catholic organization. So a wedding was in the making here, and the bride was outside. And surprisingly, they asked us to leave. Normally, we've been in, other cities throughout Europe, and as long as you're quiet and are in the back of the church, not sitting up on a front pew or anything, we've never been asked to leave, but they said to us, well, we could. I basically took this picture from the front door of the church because they didn't ask us to leave that area. We were far enough away, but that was, but only invited guests were welcome inside the church. The next day, we went to the Habsburgs monastery, to the monarchy, to look at the royal jewels, and it's just an amazing amount of wealth. If you're a king and an emperor, you want to show off how wealthy you are, and so much as French built Versailles, the Habsburgs, they had their versions of the showy palace as well, and the jewels to go along with it. But here's one of the crowns. Here are some of the bling that they had at the museum. And then we went to the Royal Church, and this is right next to the palace. And it's the St. Augustine Church. Kirk is church in German. So this was the St. Augustine Church. And there's a picture, I got this off of Google. The day we were there, there was a tourist there, but not a big crowd. But what was interesting, in the church itself, they had this wonderful sculpture honoring the death of Maria Christina. So she was a duchess, and the daughter of Maria Theresa, who was one of the queens of the empire in the 1700s. This was a sculpture created honoring the death of her daughter, who died at age 32. Also in the same building, underneath, is the Habsburgs, their crypts, and they took their caskets and the crypts very, very seriously. And it was pouring rain at this time of the day, so we spent more time down here than just to stay out of the rain. But here is the crypt of Franz Joseph, which is relatively plain. Here are some of the other crypts. I mean, this is enormous Baroque artwork, but they really wanted to display their wealth and display their importance even in their death. Okay, there's Franz Joseph. We went on the next day. We went to visit the Summer Palace, and this is called Schönbrunn, and it's out. It was a 20-minute tram ride from the center of Vienna. It dates from the 1740s. It has 1,400 rooms. It's an enormous complex, and you get a ticket for a specific time that you can enter. So ours might have been 2:30. So we were there an hour earlier to get our ticket. But there's enormous gardens that you can walk around, and this just shows some of the gardens, very well maintained. This is their summer palace, even though it was quite close to central Vienna, where they had their normal palace. Here's a great number of ponds and trees, maintained trees. Here's another picture. This is from closer to the main building, looking out at wonderful gardens, and off in the hills, another sculpture, another major architectural feature that they have. Back in the 1800s, it was very popular, if you were royalty, to create a Roman ruin. So this is an artificial Roman ruin that was created to show off their interest in history. But this is a fake ruin just created to to show off what it might have looked like if it had been a real Roman ruin. Okay, so now one of the interesting parts of Vienna is, the coffee shops and coffee houses are very popular, and they really started here in Vienna. And the legend has it, it goes back to the second Ottoman Empire siege, where the Turkish soldiers left a bunch of sacks of coffee beans just laying around. And the defenders of Vienna thought, well, is this camel food? Because the Turkish soldiers had camels, and then somebody figured out, no, this is something that you brew, and they called it coffee. And so that's part of the legend of how coffee became popular. And so even to this day, coffee shops, and these are very formal and very fancy, and many of them are very formal and fancy. And you can sit there, read newspapers. They have the newspapers sitting on racks, so you can pick out a newspaper or two to read. Nobody minds if you're sitting there for an hour. It's just very relaxing. That's part of the ambiance. In the late 1800s, this was where the artists and the scientists and politicians that hang out and debate and talk and share ideas. So it became part of the culture as a way to share ideas on society and on art. And then to this day, it's a wonderful place to visit. You can have coffee, and then wonderful an apple tart or wonderful pastries, and just relax for an hour and give your feet a rest. Another interesting thing that we saw, this is the City Hall for Vienna, and it's right on that Ringstrasse Ringstrasse Road. So that, and during the summertime, they set up 4,000 or 5,000 chairs, and they have this enormous screen in front of City Hall. And for all of July and August, every night people gather here, and it's almost like a taste of Chicago. So you can go to one spot, and they have wine bars. You could pick up wine. Another, you could pick up a dinner or a treat, and then you could sit down and watch a movie or listen to classical music that's displayed on the screen. And in Vienna, they very proactively are trying to promote classical music. Much as the US, the interest in classical music is waning, and fewer and fewer people are attending classical concerts. And in some of the historical great concert groups are folding. But in Europe, they're having the same issue. People in their 20s and 30s are not as interested in classical music as their parents and grandparents. So Vienna is trying to promote this. So every third or fourth day, they'll have a classical music concert in the hopes of promoting an enjoyment of classical music. And we went to the museum and an art from the artist. It's called Hunter Wasser Museum, and this is the artist. His art is very eclectic art, and he has created a building, and I could not take pictures. They did not want you to take pictures, so I only took one. But his art is very interesting, and he was a very interesting fellow as well. He wanted to be buried under a tree, just wrapped in a cloth and buried under a tree, and that's his wish was honored. No big fancy funeral. And here is the building that he designed for his art museum. So it's both an art museum and it's housing for artists to promote artists. We took later that same day, we took a bus ride to the hills overlooking Vienna, and we just hop on the city bus. We had this day pass, and this is from high in the hills, you could see the Danube in the distance. Vienna is built right on the Danube, and you could see the whole town. And Strauss wrote a wonderful music on the hills of Vienna, and I think I have a copy of it. Tales from the Vienna Woods is Johann Strauss. And here from that same perch up on the hills is overlooking, that is the Danube that you see on the, you can see the Danube, and then they have the Danube Canal right above it. That's a smaller area, but that connects to the Danube and allows different type of shipping to take place. So all of this is a part of a wonderful way to enjoy the music of Vienna and to understand what was behind the music. Mary and I are not fancy gourmet diners, so we only ate at McDonald's once, and they serve a wonderful beer at McDonald's, but typically we eat pub food, and I can order a ham and cheese sandwich in 6 different languages, but that's some people go to Europe and to Paris and Lyon and to Vienna just for the food, and we're not in that same category. Now, one of the things that Rick Steves recommended we took advantage of, and that was we took a day trip to Melk Abbey, and the trip was a package that you could purchase from the train company, and it includes the train ride to the Abbey, and then after it includes the ticket to get into the Abbey, and then after your visit to the Abbey, you walk over to the Danube, and you get on a boat for a 2 or 3 hour Danube day trip, just 2 or 3 hours, and then you get off at this town and hop back on a train that takes you back to Vienna. So the first leg of the trip is on this high-speed train. It was going 150 miles an hour, and you don't even feel the motion at all. It's so smooth. These are dedicated train tracks, so there's no other. It's only high-speed trains, and there's no stop signs or road crossings. Everything is above grade or underneath grade, but there's never a truck crossing the tracks, because at 150 miles an hour, that train could never stop in time to avoid an accident. So it's a dedicated operation. And here is the Abbey. So the Abbey dates back to about 1100, and it's a huge complex. And so it was housed the monks for many, many years, and there still are some monks there. And it was a high school and a college for many years. It's not clear to me what it is now, other than, we saw maybe 20 monks there at a service, and that may be all that there are there. But the building itself and the library is amazing. Here we are entering the main part, the main entrance. It was beautiful sunny day. You could not have asked for a more beautiful day. Here is the chapel, and this is clearly in the Baroque style, very ornamental, a lot of gold, real gold or fake gold, but it's classical Baroque style. Here is the library, and this was one of the largest libraries, church libraries in Europe. When you think this is over 1,000 years old, this library is over 1,000 years old. And they even have a section where they have the forbidden books that only the head monk can say, you can open that to look at one of the forbidden books. But otherwise, it's a very beautiful library. After our visit, and the visit itself might have been an hour and a half. There's a little museum. one of the things in the museum that was of interest, they have a casket for the monks as they die. And the casket has an opening on the bottom so that the monk is in the casket. And when they take it to the cemetery, they open up, the bottom of the casket opens up. So the monk is still wrapped up in cloth and put in the ground. And the casket, they take that back for use at the next monk. So it's a reusable casket. But here, after our tour of the monastery, we walked around underneath the monastery and around to that road on the left. And we walked to where those two boats are, because those are the boats that will take us back towards Vienna. And on the day we were there, there was a musical group playing. These were an adult band, and apparently on the same ship we were just two people, but apparently there was a group of 70 or 80 people, and their tour group had commissioned this band to come and play as a send-off to the, so we got to enjoy the music as well. And here we have our fellow passengers. It was a sizable boat. Several hundred people could be on the boat, and they had sit-down dining. So we had a 3-hour cruise of the Danube, and it was some of the most beautiful parts of the Danube. So you could be on other parts of the Danube, like from Vienna going towards Bratislava, which is basically farmland. Here we saw many interesting towns and castles along the way. And here, naturally, we enjoyed a wonderful beer. And here are some of the castles that we saw and some of these were still intact. Some were just ruins of castles, but just wonderful views. And here's more. And one of the interesting parts, if you are traveling in this part of the Danube, both on the Danube and on the Rhine, you could be staying at a little village like this, and take day trips where you take perhaps your bike, or you get on every half hour or an hour. A boat will stop at this little dock, and if you bought a day pass on one of the boat companies, you could take this 10 miles down and then ride your bike back, or 10 miles down and hike up the hills and then hop on another boat, bringing you back to your original spot. So it's a very nice way to travel without having to drive your car or worry about driving. We took one of our last days. We took a trip, just a short bus ride to the Prater Park, and this is one of the main sites in. It's one of the original amusement parks. So this used to be the hunting ground for the royals of the empire, and then after, in the 1800s, they turned it over to the population, and they made this huge park. And you'll notice probably in the next slide, this is what they call the they don't call it the Ferris wheel, but this was created in 1897. And if you remember, not that we were there, but the Ferris wheel of the Chicago's World Fair was in 1893. And this looks almost like an exact duplicate of the Ferris wheel that was created for the Chicago World's Fair. And if you read The Devil in the White City, which is a wonderful book about the World's Fair, we created the Ferris wheel, or the engineer Ferris created it to be our answer to the Eiffel Tower of the Paris World Exhibition, which I think was in 87. A few years earlier, the Eiffel Tower went into place. So Chicago was looking for something to be our signature attraction to compete with the Eiffel Tower. So in Vienna, they just copied the Ferris wheel. They apparently they didn't obsess about it. They said, let's just do what Chicago did. So it's a huge area. We did not spend much time in the amusement park side. It's all you'd expect of Riverview and Great America, but the park around it was also wonderful. So we spent some time there just relaxing. This was our last full day in Vienna. And we had debated, we could have taken a high-speed boat down the Danube to Bratislava, which is the capital of another country to the east. But we decided, we're a little tired. This was the end of a 22-day European trip. We said, let's just take it easy and just go to the local amusement park and visit some of the gardens. So the next day we were heading home after 3 weeks, and in Vienna, all the subways will lead you to a high-speed train that looks like our Chicago Metro. That takes you a double-decker that took us from downtown Vienna out to the airport, and it was a wonderful airport, and we were able to fly. We flew from here directly to Toronto, and then caught a plane from Toronto to Chicago to end our trip. So that it was a wonderful visit and a wonderful week to see wonderful things, but also to relax at the same time in our wonderful little apartment. So that's kind of the presentation, but I wanted to open up to questions that anyone might have about the trip or about the kind of travel that we discussed here. I certainly only covered a small portion of all the wonderful things that you can see in Vienna, but I'd welcome any questions or comments that people have.
Hi, Gene. That was great. Thanks. We did get some questions in and some comments. So the first one is from Sid. He said, I spent a New Year's Eve in Vienna, dinner in a castle in a room that Beethoven had performed in.
Wow, that's a wonderful experience, and because of music, every year on WTTW they have a New Year's Eve concert from Vienna, and they play a whole lot of Mozart and Beethoven. I mean, all the leaders of Haydn, the leaders of the classical world, all had a strong Vienna connection. And to say nothing of Strauss and the waltzes, I'd encourage everyone. We're not going to be traveling much the next couple months, but New Year's Eve on WTTW, there's a wonderful concert live from Vienna that will give you a taste of that classical music. But that's a wonderful experience that Sid had.
Oh, nice. That's a great hint. All right. So we have a question here. Was the rented apartment truly rented? Have there been any good experiences with Airbnb?
Absolutely. So we used vacation rental by owner, which is now called Home Away. So we've used that 3 or 4 times in Europe, and each time it was very, very successful. So we've been very happy with that. We have not used Airbnb, but I know people have used Airbnb, and in Airbnb you can even rent a room in someone's house. But we haven't been that adventuresome. We've tended to rent an apartment for ourselves, or even if we've traveled with another couple. But we've had great experiences with that. And you want to do research. The importance is to do research to make sure that what you rent is in an area that is convenient and safe. We've known people that have rented on Airbnb or HomeAway, and they turn out to be out in a suburb where it's a 40-minute trip to get down to visit the tourist locations that they want to visit. So you want to make sure there's good transportation, or that you have a car to use, and that it's in a nice surroundings. And but if you check that out, I know we've had great experiences with that in multiple countries of Europe, and we know other people that have as well.
Oh, great. So we've got another comment. Beth said, I enjoyed a concert in this opera house. It must have been when you were on the opera house slide. It was beautiful. She said she enjoyed a concert in this opera house while on a Danube River cruise in 2017. The stop was way too short and she must see it a second time.
Yeah. There are two interesting parts of that comment. No, and that in the summertime, the opera is they're not running operas, and their symphony orchestra is not playing. They're off either on vacation or somewhere else. But what they have at the opera house is they have a daily Mozart concert, and during the daytime, because the opera house is right by a main subway stop, and it's right in the center of town, right near the cathedral as well. You're walking by the opera house a lot, and they have all these musicians dressed in their costumes of the 1780s, trying to sell you tickets to the concert that night. So it's fun to talk to these folks. But they're trying to sell the tickets so that they get enough attendees for the evening. So that's very true, and that's a fun thing to do. And we've taken cruises on. We've done Viking type cruises, and they're fun too. But the downside is you're in a town like Vienna only for a day or maybe 2 days, and places like Vienna, really you could be seeing wonderful things for 7 days and feel you still would come back for more. But so there's a downside for the Viking cruise where you're heading off at 5 o'clock and missing 2 or 3 days at the same city.
Okay. So a quick question about, was it easy to get your euros?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The days of using American Express checks are long gone.
Yeah.
When you land in and the beauty of the euro is so many countries are on the euro. Not all countries, but so many countries are on the euro that you can land and purchase your euros right there from a bank ATM right at the airport. Some banks like Harris Bank in Barrington will sell you euros. So you could give them $300 and they'll give you the appropriate number of euros. But you really don't need to do that. You can do it right when you land at the airport.
All right, good to know. Another question is, did you see the Lipizzaner show? I don't know what that is.
Okay, the Lipizzaner, those are the Spanish horses. They're beautiful horses from the Spanish riding school in Vienna. And it's one of the marvels to see, but that's one of the items that they close down in the summer. So summer is a main tourist time, but the opera and the stallions, they're off on probably some farm training for the summer. They're not. They're not. That's not an option for the summertime.
Okay. And another question: did you and Mary make all of the travel reservations, and how far in advance were they made?
So we tend to plan way in advance because we knew we were taking the trip with the singing group. So that was lined up like a year earlier for the. So we started a year ahead of time to reserve the airline tickets because we were able to use frequent flyer miles. So so we lined up those tickets almost a year ahead of time. As soon as United Airlines opened up reservations, we were on the phone to secure the airline tickets, and then the the apartment, there's more flexibility for that. That might have been 3 or 4 months early to line up the apartment. But apartment, you have lots of different options. But to get airline tickets, we try to do that very early.
Well, you guys sound organized.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so we got a comment. Looks like a great trip. Thank you for sharing your travels. And we have another question. Any tips for communicating with non-tourists around the city? Did you consult any manual for courtesy German phrases, things like that?
Yes. So there. That's a great question. So so most of the guidebooks teach, including Rick Steves, they give you all the the most popular phrases, like to thank people and some of the courtesies. Like, for example, when you leave a shop, you always say thank you. We don't do that so much in the US, but you thank the owner of a little shop if you visit. It's one of the courtesies is to say good day when you arrive and thank you when you leave. But so most guidebooks tell you those courtesies as well as the common phrases that you use. The vast majority of the people that you meet will speak English in the cities. So, but it's nice to say thank you in their native language. We also we've also had the experience, particularly if we stay at a hotel, to meet some of the locals. You meet locals a lot, but they're often busy because they're serving you food or they're doing something. But what we find more common is we meet other Europeans. So we might be if we're at a hotel with a breakfast area, we might be having breakfast, and there'll be people from the Netherlands or the UK, and they almost always are very happy to talk and ask about what's happening, particularly in the politics of the U.S. is always a big topic. But they love to. They're usually very willing to share, and they love to practice. Particularly the Germans and people from the Netherlands, they love to practice their English and to share it with English speaking, and it's amazing. Kids in Germany, they're learning English from kindergarten, and if you talk to these people that are college age or in their 30s, you would think they're totally American. There's not a trace of accent in the vast majority of them for you to say, oh, you must be German. That's not true of Americans. We learn a foreign language and everybody knows we're Americans because our use of language is typically pretty pitiful.
So we could stick to the courtesies, danke, and
yeah,
whatnot.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So another comment. Thank you for the session. It was very informative and helpful. And we have lots more questions. So let's keep going. If you drive, what are the licensing requirements? Is the first question in this. And his second question is, was Elizabeth's picture on the money previous to the euro? That's a good question.
Oh, it probably was, because she was Elizabeth of, I'm not sure which Elizabeth they're referring to.
I think it's of Bavaria.
Okay, so it probably was. So because she was a well-known figure and revered figure in, she was this beautiful lady, married this guy that was a long-serving, pretty boring guy. He was a dutiful emperor, but she was the flashy one with the beauty. So I'm sure her picture was on some money for a long time.
Yeah.
But driving typically you do not want to drive in a major city in Europe. There's no need to have a car in Vienna. Where having a car is nice if you're out in rural areas and you want to spend a time on bed and breakfasts and out in rural areas. In France, if you're in the wine country, having a car is wonderful. And it's very easy to rent a car ahead of time. You can do that from the US, from Avis or Hertz or many other vendors. And most of the cars are stick shift, but you can reserve a automatic transmission and hope when you get there that they actually have one, because you can reserve one, but that doesn't always mean it will be there when you arrive. But the stick shift cars are very easy to drive. They're very fuel efficient small engines, like so they're relatively, if you know how to drive stick shift at all, the cars are quite easy to use in Europe.
Okay. All right. And so we just have a couple more comments. Thanks for another great presentation. And this has been wonderful. Exactly the kind of information I was looking for. And then also we have one final question. Do you speak any German?
I do not speak German, other than the phrases. And Mary speaks a little German, and she speaks French much better because she's taken a lot of classes in France. And what's interesting, every time across Europe, we say something in their language, and they answer in English. And the one exception to that, we were in East Germany, what was the former East Germany, and it might have been Dresden or Leipzig, and we were entering this church in the wrong door. We were going into we should have gone in the front door, and this woman came out, and we spoke a little German, and she answered in German, and I have to believe she knew we weren't German, but I think under communism you didn't question anything from anybody in authority under East German logic. So she was playing it safe, and she answered us in German. But that was our only time where people knew we were English American and answered in German. But people are wonderful. If you try to say a few phrases in their language, people in Europe, even in Paris, have been very understanding and friendly, and they welcome us. And if we're polite and follow some simple courticises, we will be very welcome in these countries, and will be when we can go back in in 2020, late 2021 and 2022.
Well, let's all hope that's the case, and we should start making our dream travel plans now. All right. Thanks so much, Gene. This was wonderful. We'll be seeing you again in March of 2021, I believe, because you're going to talk about Madrid in March.
Yes. I look forward to that. And thank you for your wonderful audience. And thank you for being here.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.